Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN DAF Yud Gimel. We are dedicating today's class Le'ilu Nishmat Nisan ben Abraham. That's Kevin's father, Olav Shalom, whose yahrzeit is today. Before we give an intro to DAF Yud Gimel, just to close off, to tie up a loose end that is connected to the end of the sugya on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. Basically, what we learned on Daf Yud Beis is that the leniency that Chazal allow us of being matir and mavui with only a koder or only a lechi is only if that location is actually defined halachically as a mavui, with the three limitations. It has to be servicing to chatzeros, each chatzer to batim. It has to have a length more than the width. And if you don't have all of these criteriums, then it's called a chatzir. And to be matir a chatzir, you need more than just a lechi or a koida. My friends, this is the reason why nowadays, when people make ERUVIN, the way we use the words eruv, a city eruv, a bungalow eruv, we only rely on Sudas HaPesach. Because maybe the area that we are enclosing, right, is not longer than wider. And the moment it has a toidas chatzir, a koida or a lechi, which would have been a lot simpler than the Tzuras HaPesach, what we call the Eruv. It would have sufficed, but maybe it does not. But the Tzuras HaPesach is a lot better, a lot more powerful than the koida end of the lechi, which is what we use nowadays. Daf Yud Gimel, we'll refer back to the Mishnah. We're going to begin. It was a Talmud that quoted Rabbi Shmuel speaking to Rabbi Akiva. And there was a back and forth, as we'll review. We're going to spend some time identifying who was a Talmud, both of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. We're going to identify this as Rabbi Meir, and there's going to be a fascinating daf as to who was he a Talmud first. Did he go to Rabbi Shmuel first? Did he go to Rabbi Akiva first? There's going to be different statements which appear to contradict each other. We're going to be going the inyan le'inyan. Rabbi Meir was a scribe, was a sofer, and how he used to use a certain material called kantoim. It's something that when you put it into ink, it makes the ink so strong that it becomes unerasable, right? Indelible. And we'll see whether you can use such an ink or whether you have to have an ink that is erasable. As we have in the Parsha Saita, that there's one Parsha of the Torah that sometimes needs to be erased. We're going to be reviewing some dinim of a Saita, some dinim of Gittin. If a parsha that was written to be erased for one saita, whether you can use it for another saita. Similarly, whether a get, if it was written for one couple, if they, thank God, made a shalom bayis, but there's another couple with all the information that's the same name of the guy, the same name of the woman, the same city, whether the get may be used or not. We're going to have a few very famous gemaras and Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, the Shalish Shalim Nechleku B'Shamayim B'Silol. And finally, a Baskol came out and the Baskol announced that Elu ve'elu divrei Elikim Chayim, but the halach is like Beisilo. We're going to have another machloikas that people were debating for a long time, whether it's Noach Leila Adam, Shaloi Nivra, Yosid Misha Nivra. What is it better? Better to have been created, better not to have been created, as Hasidus will explain that back and forth. And if we'll have time, we will start with the third Mishnah in the Masechta on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis that better defines what exactly is a koira that suffices to be matir carrying in the mavoi and a lot more. Let's go to DAF Yud Beis Amid Beis, the last line in the Amid. Right, this is referring back to the Mishnah DAF Yud Aleph Amid Beis. So the Mishnah began Hechsher Mavoi Machlokes Beishamai Beisilo. Beishamai says you have to have a lecha and a koida. Beisilo says or a lechi or a koida. Then we had the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer that we spoke out yesterday. Then the Mishnah went to say that Mishum Rabbi Shmuel, quoting Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Talmud Echad Lefnei Rabbi Akiva, that Loi Nechluku, that there was no argument if you have a mavoi whose entrance is less than 4 amas. Everyone agrees, even the Shammai agrees, that Oy Lechi, Oy Koida. Where is there the machlokes? Only if it's wider than 4 amas, up until 10 amas. That is what this Talmud was quoting Rabbi Shmuel was saying, and Rabbi Akiva said no. Rabbi Akiva said at the end that Al-Zeh Nechluku, which really sounds like the Tanakama that began by saying there's a machlokes b'shamim b'silo, whether you need to have a lechi v'koida or lechi oy koida. Okay, so quoting again, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amar Talmud Echad Chulei Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Rabbi Akiva challenges Rabbi Shmuel. The Talmud was just quoting Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva said no. Al-Zeh Nechluku doesn't make a difference whether it is narrower than 4 amas, whether it's wider than 4 amas. There's always a machlokes. Says the Gemara L'chora, Rabbi Akiva is the Tanakama, which is a question mark. The Tanakama also began the Mishnah that the machlokes b'shamim b'silo. B'shamim says you need to have both. B'silo says either one or the other. Says the Gemara, no, there is an afkamina ikebenayu that Rav Achlai that we learned yesterday, or v'itema Rav Yechiel. And what did they say? They were machadesh that if there's an entrance to a mavui that is less than 4 tfachim, and as we gave the picture yesterday, even if after you enter the mavui widens out, so the mavui is not a makom ptur. Nevertheless, he was quoted saying, since the entrance is that narrow, it needs nothing. And whether we agree with that or not is actually a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Akiva. However, the Gemara says we don't have a clarity as to which one would be the lenient one and which one of the other, either Tanakama or Rabbi Akiva, would disagree with that and hold that no matter how narrow the entrance, you always need to have either machlokes b'shamai lechi v'koida or beisilo, one or the other. And indeed, we learned yesterday in Daf Yud Beis, if you remember, in the bottom of the Amid, that Tanoihi, there's a machlokes Tanoim. Now we know it's referring to Daf Yud Beis. Okay. Says the Gemara Tanya, Amar Rabbi Akiva. When Rabbi Akiva heard this Talmud quoting Rabbi Shmuel, that said that the Shammai was lenient when the entrance is less than 4 amas, responded Rabbi Akiva that Loi Omar Rabbi Shmuel davar zeh. You are misquoting. It can't be that someone as great as Rabbi Shmuel ever would have said that. Ella said Rabbi Akiva, Oisa Talmud Omar davar zeh. The Talmud himself is saying it. It's his own opinion. We'll see the Talmud was Rav Meir. Now he opened up, these are the words of the Braisa, completely so disregarding the Shita that he says it can't be that Rabbi Shmuel said it. So you would be sure that Rabbi Akiva would say, we don't paskin, he's just a Talmud. And ironically, the last words of Rabbi Akiva was, but the halacha is like that Talmud. End of Braisa. Asks the Gemara, it's mamash a contradiction. How gufa kasha? Omrat, lo Omar Rabbi Shmuel davar zeh. Can you imagine? This is not a Talmud. This is a Rav Meir a Talmud. That Rabbi Akiva's first reaction, right, to this leniency is that it can't even be Rabbi Shmuel said it. It's so mufrach. Alma leis hilchas hakavase. And now v'hadar amrat halacha ko'esa Talmud. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that indeed loy amra Rabbi Akiva elo lachadid ba talmidim. Rabbi Akiva made this final statement to sharpen the students. Now sometimes, not here, sometimes we find that a Tana or an Amoida says something that's not correct. They say something that's not correct to make sure that the Talmidim are awake, and they're going to say, no, Rebbe, it's wrong. What you're saying is the opposite in a respectful way. That's not the case over here. Here it means a little bit different, like what Rashi explains, that even though Rabbi Akiva was certain that Rabbi Shmuel never said it, But the logic that this Talmud was giving behind this statement that Beis Shammai will be lenient when the entrance is less than 4 ames, he gave such a good svara that Rabbi Akiva didn't mean that the halacha is like him. He meant, what he's saying makes a lot of sense. And through this, he was inspiring his other Talmidim that when they learn, they should add svara, they should add their own logic to what they're learning. Learning has 2 steps. The step number 1 is fundamental. We have to be mekabel, play the Shabbat time. We can't make anything up. We have to accept that which we receive from our teachers. First, you have to gather the information, right? Today in Cheder, learn Mishnah is Balpeh. Today it would mean learn the Shulchan Aruch. Know what the final date is. Then when you start learning, now you have to innovate. You have to give your own svaras. So the halacha, Rabbi Akiva rejected. But the svara that the Talmud was giving was so good that the halacha should have been that way, even though it's not completely rejected. And as we'll see indeed today about Rabbi Meir, that one of the great things about Rabbi Meir is he was able to explain any side of an argument. Can you imagine? That means that when you had an argument, this side made sense and the other side made sense. Both sides made so much sense that we had no idea how to come to a halach. We had no idea to come to a conclusion. That's how great Rabbi Meir's understanding was in everything. Okay, says the Gemara Baitin that Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Omar, he has a little bit of a different version in the Braisa, that Rabbi Akiva did not conclude by saying halacha ka'isa Talmud, because it's not. He so rejected it that even he said that Rabbi Shmuel for sure didn't even say it. He said nir oyin itmer. It makes sense what he's saying. This fits even better. But Rav Meir's koyach of svara was so great that even when you know the halach is not on a certain opinion, he explained it so good, you said, wow, it would make sense for the halacha to be that way. But who cares? The whole Torah is not based on sense. Torah is based on a Kabbalah, on a Mosaitis. Then we have a responsibility to try to understand to the best of our ability, which is why halachically he rejected it. But still he said that Niroyin, that this Talmud, this Gavaldik is explaining a side that's even not acceptable halach. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. I want you to know a klal. Kol mokem she'atum moitzim mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Whenever you hear a Talmud that's quoting Rabbi Yishmael, to whom? That Amar Talmud echnusnei Rabbi Akiva, a student quoting Rabbi Yishmael to Rabbi Akiva, which means that he was a Talmud of both. Which Talmud was both of Rabbi Yishmael and of Rabbi Akiva? Guys, like in the Gemara in the times of the Amoraim, Rav Yehuda, we know he was a Talmud of Rav, then he was a Talmud of Shmuel. Very similar. Many times Shmuel would ask Rav Yehuda, what did Rav say on this? What did Rav say on that? So we have something similar by the era of the Tanoim, and this specifically refers to Rabbi Meir. Now we know that after the Talmid Rabbi Akiva passed away, right, we had the Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel. No, I'm stating that back. We don't have that Shabbos. Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel was the Maisa with the Rashbi. But when the Gemara shares with us that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva passed away, the 12,000 pairs, then Rabbi Akiva had gathered another 5, or according to the Yerushalmi, 6 Talmidim. One of them was Takar Meir. But he's unique that he wasn't only the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, he was the Talmud of Rabbi Yishmael. That what Shishim is, both as Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Did Tanya. Now we're going to learn a detail that will be challenged. Amar Rabbi Meir, the following. When I was seemingly first by Rabbi Yishmael, and he, Rabbi Meir, will see as to make a livelihood, he was a soifer, he was a lavler, was a scribe. And the ink that is used to make stam, say for Torah Tefilla and mezuzahs, so there are certain ingredients that need to be used, and he would add an ingredient called kantoim. Whatever that means in English, it wouldn't help me because I won't know the word in English. So kantoim. What's the mile of kantoim? It makes the ink indelible. What's made indelible? Indelible means that you can't erase it. It becomes so strong, you can't erase the black. It's that stuck. And Rabbi Shmuel said nothing, which means Rabbi Shmuel was masking that you could put kantoim in the ink. Now you would think, why would there be an issue? The stronger the ink, the better. We'll see in a moment, there might be an issue. However, which he later he went to Rabbi Akiva. So Asra Alai, We'll see soon why, but Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Meir, you're not allowed to put kankantoim in diyoi. Says the Gemara, not that Rabbi Meir was not the Talmud of both. He was. But you're quoting a Braisa. I'm going to quote a statement. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Now you can't quote from a Amoira to challenge a Braisa. But Shmuel is quoting the name of Rabbi Meir. And we're going to have two details from the following story that will challenge the version of the Braisa story, which is that Rabbi Meir said, first he was by Rabbi Akiva. And then Hoyisi Meitel Kankanto Lotoich Diyoi, and Rabbi Akiva was the one that Veloy Amali Davar. Rabbi Akiva said nothing. Then Ukshubas Eitzel Rabbi Shmuel and Amar Li. Rabbi Shmuel interacted with me and he asked me, B'ni, my son, Ma Malachtecha, Mehechen Yereg Zachai, how do you make a living? And Omar Tiloi Lav Lorani, I'm a scribe. And Amar Li, to which now his second Rebbe, Rabbi Shmuel, tells him, Rabbi Meir, B'ni, have a zoir b'mlachtecha. You should be zoir. Now, zoir, al pi nigla means you should be very careful. And al pi chasidus, you should shine. It's a malachas hakodesh. You should do it b'lashon zoyha. Shemalachtecha malacha shemayim. And then he added that shema ata machasar oisachas, that if you inadvertently will omit even only one letter, or if only miyater oisachas, if you're going to add one letter, is dim says machrib as kol ha'olam kulay, you'll destroy the whole world. Why will you destroy the whole world? So guys, quickly, let's look inside the Rashi in a place, and we'll read the Marsha for the first time in ERUVIN. So Rashi says, I'm reading more or less, and towards the end of the top third in the Amid, machasar oisachas, he gives an example that it says, Hashem, Elohim, Emes. And if you take out the letter Aleph from Emes, in Texan Aleph, Hariyat Machriv, right? You yourself understand what that means. Another example, where it says Vayidaber Hashem. So if you're going to add one letter, which is a Vav, Vayidabru, which will, God forbid, attribute some sort of plurality to God Almighty, weiter, you're going to be Machriv of the world. That's the example that Rashi gives. Toisvis, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth Toisvis in the Amit. He goes back to Machrev Eso'olam, so he dafka wants to give an example of Maisa Bereshis, of the creation of the world. So when it says Bereshis Bara, so he says, instead of Bara, similar to Rashi, if you would by mistake add a Vav, and it's going to read Bara Oi, Bereshis, again in the Belashon Rabim, you're Machrev of the world. Zokt Rashi, Zokt Toisvis. Comes the Marsha, and he says, Al Pi Kabbalah, I'm going quickly into the Malkelushi Agadis, the Yashleme B'Pshitus, and it doesn't only have to refer to, like we said, Hashem Emes, and it comes from Emes, becomes, that without an Aleph. No, he says any letter of the Torah, any addition, all of that will be Machrev of the world. Every letter in the Torah is the name of God Almighty, and actually there is a hidden part to every letter of the Torah, and he's going to the Midrash, the Mashar's quoting, Shehi Kesuva Lefanav, that the Torah was written in front of God, Be'esh Shechaira, Al Gabe Eish Levana, was black fire superimposed over white fire, Ubahen, and through the Torah, Barak Kodesh Baruch Hu Silamai. And not only did he create it in the past, the Mashal is like Chasidus, Umekaimai, but he's being Mekaimit right now from the Torah, the Nimsa, Machasad Oisechad. Any letter, you're Machlev of the world. Same thing with adding. The world is perfect the way God made it. Don't add. Okay, back over here. So this is what Rabbi Shmuel was telling Rabbi Meir. So Marti Loi, now is where Rabbi Meir responds to a second Rebbe, Rabbi Shmuel. Davar echad yeshli, and the kankantim shemai. I have a certain ingredient called kankantim. That I put it in the ink. Now, why did Rabbi Meir tell it to Rabbi Shmuel now? We'll explain in a moment. So for that, Amar Li, if I can't, Rabbi Shmuel is the one that said you can't do that. Can't be. Why can't it be? So he quoted from the Parsha of Osoita. Now we're going to get in a moment in the Gemara Machloikas Tanoim whether a person is allowed to actually cut out from a Sefer Torah those psukim that need to be erased as part of the procedure to be Boidek Osoita, as we'll learn in Masech Osoita. So let's go now, that Rabbi Shmuel felt that you could even cut it out from a Sefer Torah. Now, you're not going to passel a Sefer Torah. The Stama that's a Sefer Torah was written l'shem Sefer Torah. Now the Sefer Torah became possible. And with all of the dinim, when you have too many psulim on every column, comes a point you can't even fix it halachically. So let's say it's referring to this case. But Rabbi Shmuel felt that in certain circumstances, you can take an actual Sefer Torah, cut out Parsha, Soita, those psukim, and what do you have to do to it? It says, because of umacha, umacha. So how can you erase a letter if you have kankantaim, which makes these letters indelible? And now, 1 second, before we come to the contradiction between this version and the Baraisa, just to understand, Rabbi Shmuel was telling Rav Meir, be careful, Malach Shamayim. Number 2, don't add, don't subtract. So why did Rav Meir respond, I have kankantaim? It makes sense. It wasn't stam. This was a response to the carefulness. Maika Amalei, Umaika Mahadalei. So the Gemara explains. Taka Amalei, Rav Meir responded, you're telling me I should be careful not to add or subtract a letter. I want you to rest assured, the Rebbe. I won't make a mistake. Now, he wasn't saying that, God forbid, human beings can make mistakes. But there's 2 types of mistakes. There's a mistake, and there's a mistake because you don't know. Rabbi Shmuel meant you can't tell a person never make a mistake. Go tell a doctor, never make a mistake. Like, never make a mistake. I'm doing the best I could. What he meant is there's a mistake that we make because we didn't learn enough. That's something that's up to me. I should learn more, and I'll know it. That was the mistake. So Rav Meir first reassured Rabbi Shmuel, the Baki I know. I only became a Sefer after I became a Baki. And I know all the letters in the Torah. And that's a big deal because as we learn in Kedushin, when the Gemara speaks over there, amongst other things, about Ezra HaSefer and about how many letters you have in the Sefer Torah, what's the middle of the Torah, there's a machlokes. The Gemara says, why is there a machlokes? Go count. The Gemara says, we don't know how to count anymore. We don't know how to count the letters of the Torah. Some letters count for more than one. Then we have the Midrash that the Kosmos Oir, Dafka from Rav Meir, you see, from the scribe wasn't with an ayin, it was with an aleph, Rav Meir says, I'm a Baki. Number 2, Ela filu mechash lizvuv nami. Then there's another accident. Not that I'll make a mistake because of my lack of knowledge. Sometimes you write it correctly. He gives an example. Comes a fly. The fly rests on a letter. You wrote it correct. Let's say a letter is a daled. So the difference between a daled and a reish, basalagani, is a little yud at the top right. And a fly, without your knowledge, can shmudge it, can round the daled. So even that, Dilma Asiv Yosef Atagi the Daled Machis Le Mashalei Reish, and let's even go with Rashi Toisvis, that and then you can make Hashem Echad, even over there, that's again Machriv Esoilam, you can make the Daled into a Reish. So you should know, I also foresee that. I do whatever humanly possible that shouldn't happen, which is David Echad Yesh Livik and Kanton Shemoi, Shani Matalot Echad Yoy. So now you understand, it makes sense. The flow of the conversation, it's not apples and oranges. It was one hemshech of a conversation. The bottom line is, kasha, the first white line, shimush, ashimush. In other words, we're wondering the sequence, under whom did he study first? Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Akiva? They contradicted the Baraisa and this version. And also, kasha, asara. Who was the Tana that forbade using kankantoim in the Diyoi? So the Gemara says, the second white line, what happened was, first he went to Rabbi Akiva, and then when Meir felt in the beginning that he cannot fully grasp the depth of the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. It's like nowadays you go into the Zal, you go to Rabbi Shachat. No, don't do that first. First, you have to go to someone that is gonna be able to teach you the whole Torah Shabbat Peh. You have to gather Gemara. After you have the tradition, then you go to the greatest Rosh Yeshiva who's going to teach you how to be mefalpel with it. So when he went to Rabbi Akiva, it's not that Rabbi Akiva also had the whole Messiahs, but he taught in a way that Rameir felt he wasn't ready for it. So then he went to Rabbi Shmuel. So you can argue sometimes that his first teacher was Rabbi Shmuel, because when he was by Rabbi Akiva, before Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Meir felt he's not gaining from him. And the Gemara here means he received, he was malakid the whole Torah Shabbat Peh. And then he went back to Rabbi Akiva. In order of a Savar Sfara. So therefore, on one, you can write that he went first to Rabbi Akiva, Emes. But on the other hand, you can argue that he went really first to Rabbi Yishmael when he was being makabel the tradition, and then he went to Rabbi Akiva. But El Asora Kasha, says the Gemara, Kasha, contradiction. There's a problem. Who was the Tana that answered using Kankantaim? It's not clear whether it was Rabbi Akiva, whether it was Rabbi Yishmael. Now, as we know that the word Kasha is not tiyufta, which means there must be an answer to the question. But let's move on. It's partially late. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Ameir Hoya Oimer, Lakoil Matilim Kankantoim. What did Rav Meir paskin? You can put Kankantoim into everything. In other words, when you write a Sefer Torah, when you write those psukim, clearly the Tanakami here holds, right? Rabbi Yehuda holds that you could erase, you could use it, and in order for you to use it, it has to be v'kasav umacha. Only there, don't put kankantim. However, Rabbi Yaakov says Mishmai means in the name of Rabbi Meir. No, you can put kankantim in the whole Sefer Torah. None of the Sefer Torah is going to be used ever for a soita. Chutz mi parsha soita sheba migdash, in the Beis HaMikdash, if you needed to write separately those psukim that have to be erased, it's there that you can't put kankantim. And my benayu between these two versions, Bishita Sabmeir, this is Amar Yirmiyah, Limchay Klamen HaTorah Ika benayu, as we spoke out. Can you use a Sefer Torah? If yes, then you can't put kankantim, at least not in those psukim. If you can never use a Sefer Torah that was written l'shem Sefer Torah, then a Sefer Torah can be used with dioi that has kankantoim in it. Says the Gemara, this is linked to the following machlokes l'chu'ura. Here, we're not speaking about using a Sefer Torah for a Sefer. Here we're speaking about a parsha that was written in the Beis HaMikdash, a standalone psukim that was meant for a Sefer, and for whatever reason, let's say the Sefer says, I'm not drinking. So now they had a parsha of a Sefer, comes along another Sefer, can you use that which was written for Rachel, whether you can use it for Leah? That's the question. Machlekes Tanaim. Tanakama holds ein Megillah Sheira, that if it was written for one, you may not use it lahashkes basoita acheres for another. However, Rab Achi Bar Yoshia Omar another Tana, Megillah say yes, kisheira lahashkes bam soita acheres. In other words, no kavana is needed. Now, guys, think about it. L'chora, it's the same thing over here. Sefer Torah was written with no kavana. According to the latter Tana, you can use one from the other. You can use a Sefer Torah for a Sefer. L'chora. According to the first Tana of the Braisa, ein Megillah Sheira, you have to write it l'shem that Sefer. So then the Sefer Torah cannot be used. Says the Gemara that you cannot link one machlokes to the other, and the Gemara is going to give two opposite ways of going. Both of them will come to the same conclusion. One is not connected to the other. Amarav Papa Dilmalohi. At Kamla Kamatana Kama Hassan that ein Megillah. So we're speaking about the ein Megillah Sheira Hashkes V'Shoit Acheres, is because it wasn't written stam. It was written for a Sefer. We're going to call Sefer one Rachel. Since the intik l'shum Rachel, guys, this is a very deep expression. The word intik doesn't mean designated for. The word intik means ripped away from everyone else, which is really what Kedushin Nisuin is. In other words, when you wrote those psukim for Rachel, part of that kavana is it's not for anyone else. You excluded everyone else. So now you can't use it for someone who you excluded. So Su Loyhandra Menakta L'Shum Leah. You can't now reconnect it to Leah if you had excluded Leah. Avul Dabatoida, the Stama Michtava, maybe Hachinami, the Machakinon, even according to the Tanakama. And I'll give you the logic the other way also. Amarav Nachman by Yitzchak, Dilma on the other side. The second time in the Braisa, Rabbi Achi Bar Yoshia, that what? That yes, you could take one and write it for the other. You know why? Because at least it was written l'shem a soita. Hassan, mias l'shum soita ba'olam. But a Sefer Torah, it was not written for a soita. What's a Sefer Torah written for? Lehislame ksiva. Wow. Guys, remember this. ERUVIN Yud Gimel. It was written to be studied. You know why this is so important? You know what the Rosh holds? That we're Mekayim, the second to last, the last mitzvah on the Torah. Ksiva Sefer Torah by buying Svarim. Where does he get it from? That's what could be one of the sources. No, it's a Sefer Torah that's written to be studied from. Shahachinami, you can't use it at all for any site. So anyways, you can't link one with the other. Now, hold on. We quoted Rabbi Bar Yoshia that says, Azvaz, that yes, you can use something that was written for one site, for Rachel, you can use it for Leah. Asks the Gemara of Elyahu, Lol, Rabbi Bar Yoshia, Hadetnan, Mishnah, and Gittin, regarding Gittin, that cause of get Lagadas Sishta. Let's say ERUVIN. ERUVIN wrote a get to the Megadish's wife, Leah, turning to the you'd given on his base. And Vinimlach, thank God, he's not divorcing. ERUVIN is not divorcing Leah. Happens to be that in the same village, that's important because on the Gittin, you have to write the date, the location, and the names. There happens to be same day, same village, same names, another couple. Umatzu ben Iroi va'amar. The guy that wrote it, he never spent $10. He doesn't want to lose $10. He wants to get his money back. So he tells to his landsman with the same name, with the wives the same names, Shimcha kishmi, K'shem ishtecha, K'shem ishti. So therefore, why didn't you buy it off me? I'll give you a discount. Says the Mishnah, Pasul Legadish boy. And there's no machlokes there. And why is Pasul Legadish boy? So guys, Rashi, top line in the Amid writes, I'll tell you why. Because when it comes to the Parsha in Gittin, it says, Parsha's Kiseitse, the Torah writes the words, the Chasav Law, right? Remember that? The Chasav Law, Law Lishma. So says, the Havamina is, Rashi says, at the end of Parsha's Nasai, after the Torah goes through the whole procedure, it says, Vayish Asher Taber Olav Ruach Kina, the Kina Sishtoi, etc., etc., and it says, Va'asa Law HaKoyin, Va'asa Law. So if the Kasav law means for her and you can't use it for someone else, how does he touch the Va'asa law? The Va'asa law means for her. And if it was written for Rachel, how can you use it for Leah? So the Gemara says, no. The word law means for her. You're right. You can't use it for someone else. But what does the law go on? By Gittin, it says V'kasav law. Over there by Gittin, Kisei say V'kasav law. So therefore, the law goes on the Ksav. Ve'inan Ksiv. Ve'inan Ksiv Lishma. Over here it says Va'asa. Va'asa means he should perform. What does the performance refer to? The Gemara says to the erasing. To the erase. Means if it was already erased for Rachel, you're right. You can't use it for Leah if a new Saita comes about and the first one doesn't want to drink. But the writing, there's no V'kasav law. And the Asiyah regarding the Saita is not the writing, but it is the erasing. Gewaldig. Says the Gemara. Now that we mentioned Rav Meir, and by the way, this really goes back to the fact, to the first brayso we had on Daf Yud Gimel, that even though Rav Akiva tells Rav Meir, Rabbi Shmuel never said it, the halacha is like you, or it sounds like the halacha is like you. So Rav Meir would confuse people. That means Rav Meir can quote something that's not the halacha, and he would explain it so good that when you would hear it, if you wouldn't know otherwise, you would accept it as the halacha. Now, what do you think that does? You would think it makes everyone follow your opinion. You know what it does? It does the opposite. Makes sense, it does the opposite. It means if you meet a Yid that has such a koyach hasbara, that's so deep, that no matter what side you pick, he can make it sound to you like this is it, you'll be afraid to rely on him. And now this actually explains the following. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Acha bar Rav Chanina. Look at these words. Galu v'yadua lifnei misha amar v'haya ha'olam she'ein b'doirei shel Rav Meir kamoisen. He was like, we say by Shaul HaMelech, Mishichma Yulamayla Mikolam. No one was like him. But the problem is, now guys, I just for one example, I'm quickly jumping to Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis. These are very important amudim. When people, how do they get the halacha from the Gemara? So on Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis, mamash the middle of the line begins with the little Rabbi Akiva Eger Simon. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, listen to the Gemara. Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, right? They're the ones that argue. Halacha, Rabbi Yehuda. Right. Rav Meir and Rabbi Yosi, the Gemara says, halacha ki Rabbi Yosi. No, it's as a klal, we don't follow. Why don't we follow if he was greater than everyone else? Answers the Gemara, shelo yochlu chaveirov la'amoid al soiv datoi. Dafka because he was that great. And that's a mila. It's a mila, but when it comes to halacha, if you know that the halacha is it's kosher, and when I've made explain to you that it's treif, it makes so much sense. So what happens in the future? You're afraid to listen to him. You say, oh, he can make everything to him will make sense. Like the Gemara says, Shehu Oimer al Tamei Tor. Rav Meir was able to explain on something that we know is Tamei. He would explain it to you and you would conclude he must be a star. And Umar Lepanim would make sense. Or on something that's star, Rav Meir would be able to explain the opposite side, that it's Tamei, and his hasbara, it's not that you didn't understand him, you understood him. His hasbara was so good, Umar Lepanim. So the end is, I'm Pashat afraid to follow what he's saying because he's so much smarter than me. I don't have a response to him, but it doesn't mean that he's right because it begins with the Messiah. Okay. How do we learn? Really, late of Meir Shemai, his name wasn't even of Meir. Ela Rebbe Nehoirai Shemai. And why did they call him Meir? Rab Meir, Shehu Meir Einei Chachamim B'Halacha. It almost sounds like we're contradicting each other. We just said we don't paskin the halacha like him. You understand? No. Because what we did was like this. First, we listened to the halacha. Whoever had the clear, better Messiah, so to say. See, Rav Meir went here, Rav Meir went there. And by the way, we know that Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva argued a lot. So here he was Makabel. First, we found out who the halacha is like. And then we went to Rav Meir, and then he lit up. He was masber the halacha. Rav Meir never went against the Messiah. And that's the best thing. First, learn the halacha, and then go to the one who is able to explain it to the best way possible. It's like the whole Yiddishkeit is that way. That Nasav and Nishma. We begin with, we accept it. But after you accept it, then there's a Nishma. And Rav Meir was the greatest Nishma. Now the Braisa continues. Now, my friends, this Nehoiroi is not Rav Meir. There was another Tanach that is referred to as Rebbe Nehoiroi. And on him we also say that Loi Nehoiroi Shemai, that other, when you learn in the Mishnah Braisa, Rav Nehoiroi, really it's either Rav Mechemia, or as we just had this, Rabbi Lazar ben Aruch Shemai. We just had this at the end of Shabbos. However, Lama Nikra Shemai Nehoiroi, why is he quoted as Rabbi Nehoiroi? Something similar. Shemani here Eine Chachamim Ba'alacha. He lit up the eyes of the Chachamim. B'chasidus l'chora, there's the Ma'oir and the Oir. The source and l'chora Rav Meir is the Ma'oir, Meir, and Rav Nehoiroi is a lower Madrega. Let's go back. Amar Rebbe. Says Rebbe. Again, about the greatness of Rebbe Meir. One of the Talmidei of Rebbe Meir was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rebbe. Rebbe said, as a given, I am sharper than all of my colleagues. That's a fact. The question is why? So Amar Rebbe, the reason why I'm the sharpest from all of my chaverim, because the chazisei Rav Meir ma'achorei. Because when Rav Meir gave a class, I always went to the class. My chaverim sometimes says they can miss, and then they'll hear chazara. When you hear the words of a teacher, you hear all the words, but you don't see his facial expressions when they're teaching. And there's so much wisdom that comes through dafka seeing your Rebbe. And by the way, Rebbe didn't always sit in front of Rav Meir. Rebbe many times sat behind Rav Meir, still sitting behind Rav Meir, seeing the back of his head while he's teaching is a lot better than only hearing later chazara verbatim even of what he said. So Rebbe says, I always made an effort to be there, even if I only sat behind him. And he added, the ilu chazise mikame, had I had the merit of sitting in front of him, then I would have been even machadat matvei, I would have been even sharper. And as it says, because why should your eyes see your teacher? To learn from your teacher. You can hear what they're saying. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Amar Yechon. Talmud Rav Meir. Now that we learned the koyach of Rav Meir, and his name was Sumchas, right? We learned a lot about him in Mishnayos. What was the koyach of Rav Meir? He wasn't the greatest Baal Messiah. We don't pass him like him. He was the greatest Baal Hasbara. And you know what the greatness of Rav Meir was? He sheared that koyach with his Talmidim. That's the hemshech. So Sumchas, because he was the Talmud of Rav Meir, he was able to give 48 reasons for a halach. Now he was the Talmud of Rav Meir. Rav Meir is because he was Meir Einei Chachamim Bahalacha. Rav Meir knew his power. Rav Meir was very careful. Rav Meir was careful not to explain so good the other side because it confuses people. However, there was, and Sumchas therefore never explained the other side. He explained the halachic side. But weiter, there was a Talmud that was a Vasik, a very thorough Talmud. He would do the opposite. That was Biyavno, Shohayim Metayed Es Asheretz B'Meir V'Chamishim Tan. Asheretz, you can't eat. Asheretz, the Shmoyne Shiratzim, is Metame. This Talmud, he wasn't, God forbid, rejecting the Torah, but he was able to give you 150 reasons why Asheretz is not coming. You know, it was the same koyach of Rav Meir, but he would share it. Now, he wasn't rebelling against anything, but he showed people how al pi sfara you can go to the other side. And Bachlal, this is so important in life to remember that we don't base anything on logic. If you base things on logic, if you're smart enough, you can make the worst thing make sense. And Amar Ravina, I can also do that. I can't give 150 reasons, but I'll give you one reason. I'll show you how you can, that I'll be Torah logic, you can be Metayed Asheretz. Obviously, we're not saying this lahalacha, God forbid. And what is that? A nachash that causes death. Now, if a nachash bites a person and dies, the person is metame. Even if the nachash kills an animal is metame mishum nevela. Therefore, he's mad betuma. Nevertheless, a nachash is not one of the shmoyne shiratzim. A sheretz don't kill people, right? A mouse doesn't kill people. Think they do? They don't. They just scare the people. Sheretz she'eg meimis, and therefore it's not mad betuma. So like kolshem, that if it dies, if a nachash is not metame, a sheretz should not be metame. That's a kalvachomer logic, a Torah logic, which can lead a person to conclude that a sheretz is not metame. But really, velohi. Now the Gemara has to explain even al pi logic, why it's not correct. Because ma'aser kutz ba'al makav. He gives a great example. What happens if a thorn pierces a person, right? In English, a bullet, and kills a person. So should you say that the bullet should be metame because it's mar b'tumei? No. Why don't we say that? Because the emes is that it's not the bullet that brought about tumah. Tumah doesn't come about by a bullet, by a thorn, by a snake. Tumah comes about by the fact that the neshama left the person. Tumah comes about because something went away. It's the opposite of something active. It's something passive. It's in the absence of life comes in tumah. So what did the nachash do? The nachash chased out the neshama, but it didn't bring tumah in. Who brings tumah? The Torah says that when life leaves, then tumah comes in. So it's not directly causing anything. Even the nachash is not causing. Not the nachash is causing, not the sheretz is causing, nothing. The Torah is telling you that when something leaves, tumah comes in. Okay. For 3 years, they were debating. This is not Shammai and Hillel. These are the Talmidim, the Hasidim. They were debating the Beis Shammai, the Beis Hillel. And we just learned to Tosfos a few DAF ago, my friends. It's mamish the same concept of Rav Meir, that even though the Talmidei Beis Shammai were in the minority, but the Machadei they were smarter. With logic, they would prove themselves to be right. That was the biggest challenge. The Roiv was with Beis Hillel, but Beis Shammai made more sense. So they got strapped. So you follow the majority, but Beis Shammai says we make sense. Until Yotzam Baskol V'Amar, the last narrow line, Elu ve'elu divrei Elikim Chaim. Both are divrei Elikim Chaim. However, v'halacha k'Beis Hillel. Elu ve'elu Chaim, the way Hasidus explains, is because, like we just learned in the Marsha, that God creates the world through the Torah. Now there are many worlds, which means that the Torah manifests in many different ways. Beruchnius, each world, so to say, has its Torah. There's the way Torah is learned, and it's all the same Torah, but in different madregas. Torah from Atzilus, the Torah from Bria, the Torah from Yetzirah. And whenever there's a machlokes between Tanoim and Amoraim, what they're saying is true on a certain level. Divrei Elikim, but maybe only in the world of Yetzirah. Here in Olam Ha'aseh, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. But now the question is, and one thing clearly, it's not because they made more sense. That's the whole DAF we're learning today. Sense, Rav Meir was the greatest. We don't paskin like Rav Meir. So you have to be zoicha that through you, you're channeling the halacha. What gives you that merit? Not because you're the smartest, because you're the humblest, because you have bittul. They were easygoing. They were forbearing. They were forgiving. Mamish. And how did that express itself? That Vishoinim, Divireim, Vidivrei Beishamai, the way Rashi explains. When there was a machlokes, so let's say Beis Hillel brought a source, a pasuk. Beishamai brought a pasuk. The Chevre, the Beis Shammai, the Talmidei Shammai, they ignored the pasuk of Beis Hillel. They were smarter. They said, they're wrong. Beis Hillel would take into account what Beis Shammai is saying. They would analyze the pasuk. They would try to explain it differently. In other words, they were listening to the other side. And whenever they would quote, whenever the Talmidei Beis Hillel would quote the other side, they would put them, Beis Shammai, before Beis Hillel. They were humble, they were bottled it. For example, this is in Sukkah. What's the minimum size of a Sukkah? We just had this, right? Whether it's 4 machlokes tanoim, whether it's 4 amas by 4 amas, or whether the way we paskin, it's 7 tvachim, but the way the Mishnah speaks about 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim is that it's enough space for your head and the roiv of your body to fit into the sukkah. So if you had that minimum size, but there was a downer, the downer is that the table upon which was your food was outside of the sukkah. Where the Seichabayis. Now what's the downside? The Rebbe was very careful when he ate. The Rebbe never bowed down to his food. So he had a bowl of soup. You put the spoon would come to him. The food comes to you. When we have soup, the ruchni is right like a behemoth, right? We go into the food. You go down. So if you have the food outside the sukkah, there's a fear. The sukkah is so little. When you're going to eat, you might go towards the food. You won't eat in the sukkah. So is that a kosher setting to eat in? Machlokes. Beis Shammai poislin or Beis Hillel machshir. Now listen. Omru Beis Hillel Beis Shammai loikachoya ma'aseh. It's so beautiful. They're not giving us fodder. The time of Beis Hillel Beis Shammai made more sense. They were giving him a soda. This is the way it was. That's how we received it. I have a story. The best proof for Allah is a story. The generation prior to me did that way. Who's making the statement? Talmidei Beis Hillel. Who are they mentioning first? Normally you would mention our group first, right? No, that's we don't have to go further just to get to Benaya. When they're speaking to their counters in Beis Shammai and they're quoting a story, they're mentioning Beis Shammai before Beis Hillel. Now what? That once the earlier generations of our chevra, of our two groups, we went to the Mevaker, the Tanach, Rabbi Yochanan ben Hachironis. And we, both of our groups, found Rabbi Yochanan ben Hachironis, Umatzu Yoshev, Roishev Basuka, V'Shuchan Techabayis. And according to what the Talmidei Beis Hillel heard, no one said anything. And if Take, the earlier generations of Talmidei Beis Shammai would have been against it, they would have protested. No, it's the fact that the elders of your community did not protest, that means that they also agreed that it's okay. It's a Messiah. So the Amru Lahem Beis Shammai, you're bringing that story. Ooh, did we protest? You don't remember that part. Afhem Amru, yes, they protested against Rabbi Yochanan ben Hachironis. And they told him, if this is the way you always made your sukkah, it's like you go into a guy today and he builds a sukkah every year. That's his sukkah. And then you discover that the sukkah is not good. That means that his sukkah was never good. That was Shammai. They were sharp. So they told him, If that's the way you always made your sukkah, like Kiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyomecha. So what do we see over here? The fact that they were magdim. They are saying, not the opposite. If you humble yourself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to lift you up. And look how we spell it out at Tanai Kafel, right? Whoever runs after fame, fame runs away from you. If you run away from fame, then fame chases you. So there's a famous story that someone told his teacher, I'm always running away from fame. Why didn't fame catch up to me? Why am I not famous? So they never told him, you're running away from fame, but every now and then you look back to see fame is chasing you. Whenever you look back, you chase it away. Right, guys, this is Omri's Siyam on Brachas. We're back over here at ERUVIN. This is to keep Omri in the group over here. Whoever pushes the time, whoever forces time, things are meant to happen at a certain time. Now, you have to have Ruach HaKodesh to know when to force it. But there are many times that if you force it, you do the opposite. You create setbacks. The time pushes you away. And the opposite, if you yield to time, if you have that patience at the right time, then the opposite, then the time comes after you. How life is. It's amazing. You have to get that type of flow to make things work. So now that we quoted this Chazal there was for 3 years they were debating. So Tanach Rabbanan, another debate that happened for a long time, but this wasn't 3. This is of great meaning. This was 2.5. Tanach Rabbanan, shtei shanim amechze, nechluku b'shamay b'sil. Halolu oimrim, noyach loyla adam, shaloi nivra, yosem mishenivra. It would have been better for us never to have been created. You know, kol hadrachim b'cheska sakana. As Chassidus way speaks out, our neshama before it came down was mamish, in godliness, and coming down to this world is a terrible yirida. It would have been better for us never to have been created. On the other hand, what we can accomplish here, we are yafa sha'achas b'toira u'b'masam toivim b'tshuva masam toivim b'olam hazeh b'kol chayu elam habo. So that's the basilu. The halalu emrim noyach le'adam shenivra yosem mishenivra. And unlike before, they couldn't come to an agreement because whenever they debated for 3 years, that's it, the chazaka. Only God can resolve it. Here, before the 3 years, they came to an understanding. Nimnu v'gamru, they both. Nimnu means they took account, but they because of the roiv opined here, like Beis Shammai, the gamru means that when you make a vote, we learned to say Rashi. It's not pshat that the losing party, they say, well, I dissent, but I'll acquiesce. No. Again, back to the DAF of Rav Meir. Really, you can give sense to every side of an argument if you're smart enough. So once they heard, there was always bittul. Once there was a raiv, so everyone knew that we're going to paskin like the majority. They were humble. They figured out how to make logic of the opposite side. So once there was a count, everyone agreed, it would have been better not to have been created. Now, this is very mean. I know that Rabbi Manis Friedman fabrengs with this for years. What are they debating over here? It's a very important debate. In other words, for whom are we keeping the mitzvahs? That's the real debate over here. Many people say, well, God is infinite, God is perfect, God doesn't need anything, God doesn't need me. So I'm here for me. I'm here for me. The other side says, no, the emes is that if God would have no need, now God's need is God chose to have a need because God is perfect. But once God chose to have a need, God needs our mitzvahs. So if God needs our mitzvahs, that's the whole debate over here. Am I here for me? Am I here for God? This expression that it would have been better for me not to have been here. I'm not here for me. I benefit when I do mitzvahs. Well, the reverse is also true. I lose when I make a mistake. For me, it's not worth the risk. Everyone agreed to that. Everyone concluded that we are here for God. but we're here for God. The problem is I can get into trouble. So how much do I have to lose for God? Well, obviously, don't lose anything. But if I made a mistake, so here there's two versions. First, accept that we're not here for ourselves. And that's the key to life. Not here for ourselves isn't just a selfless statement. It's much deeper than that. That we are here for Hashem. I'm here for God. It changes everything. I'm not here for me. Nervous then, I'm here for God. And I have to do mitzvahs. What happens if I failed? So either yefashvesh b'masov, yefashvesh means for the past. Okay, if and I'm here for God, but if I made a mistake, I'm going to be held to account, like I'm going to pay a price. Don't worry, do tshuva. You can do tshuva for the past. Another version was yemashmesh is future oriented. You're not here for you. So what are you here for? Figure out what does God want from me, and understanding that I'm not here for me, and that changes everything. No, there's nothing wrong with us doing the best we could to appreciate the ride, but we're not on this ride for ourselves. So whenever a decision has to be made, if there's a greater good for God by me choosing A, that's the right choice, because it's not here for me, it's for the Eibishter. And then I'll do the best I could to appreciate it better, to give logic to it better. And Yemashmesh by myself, future oriented, that I should set my mind with this way of living, that the Eibishter needs our mitzvahs. How powerful is that? It's for the Eibishter. How much responsibility and how much meaning does our lives have, because we're not living for ourselves. The moment a person feels they're living for themselves, that's the beginning of all the tzadis, because then if something happens to them that they say, this wasn't worth it, so who needed the whole thing? There's no answer to that. But now we have an answer. For you, Taka would have better. I agree with you. For you, it wasn't worthwhile. Who cares? You're not here for you. For the Eibush, that every time you do a mitzvah, God benefits. And that's the whole kavanah. We are here to make a dira lo yizbarach. Okay, my friends, we'll stop over here. God willing, tomorrow, starting with the third Mishnah, coming back to ERUVIN. That was great.
Rabbi, yes, of course.
Something to my machine for a second. Gewaldig.
Rabbi.
Mendel?
Yeah.
What's the referral about the Gemara about that Sefer Torah that is written for something is not allowed to be used? So how can the Rabbi should never make a bite malis farim because of that? The beginning of the class. After Kankantum. It's the minute 20, something 16 to 20.
I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
I'm trying to understand the referral to a Gemara talking about the Sefer Torah that was written to be used, cannot be checked. I didn't understand what he was saying. It was too fast.
All right. So, Kevin, that was a great DAF for your father over here. Guys, enjoy this, because that's the end of this in ERUVIN. Not coming back. It's coming back many, many years from now. This.
Rabbi.
Which part is coming back many years from now, Rabbi?